I'm going to get every Paragon to degree 100 and see how far they can get on their own. We'll start with the Apex Plasma Master on Sulphur Springs, one of 2 Paragons that isn't on logs, as this is his best map. I made a maxed out one in the 60s and let it run. This monster of a tower is way too strong for these early rounds, but I was wondering if there would be a better spot for him on this map. Luckily, his range lets him see all 3 loops from this platform, and since he's in the canyon, his snowballs bounce off walls and ricochet like crazy throughout the track, so this should be his best spot. For the next 50 rounds, nothing lived that long. The Bloons would float along the small loop until they got in his range and instantly break. Even on round 119, the 3 beds melted as they turned that corner. This is expected, as Paragons are free play machines, but the one thing I really enjoyed about watching the APM is the weird way he pops balloons. He shoots like crazy when the first one comes in his range and stops once it's popped. But then, after a slight delay, all of the snowballs he shot split up and bounced throughout the track. So we end up seeing him attacking in waves. He fires a couple shots, clears the screen, then repeats. As the rounds went on, he started shooting more and more often. Like in the 130s, he actually shot most of the time. Either it was because the fortified ZMGs had enough health that he would shoot for a few seconds, or there were enough DDTs and Moabs that would quickly get back inside his range after he cleared the screen. So it was fun watching the map fill up with snowballs. But that brings us to round 140, the first real challenge of the video. The Fortified Bad. The free play ramping gives him plus 400% health and 138% speed on top of the fortified property. So he's coming in at a whopping 200,000 health, over 7 times more than the round 100 bad. And this is where we finally saw the power of the Apex Plasma Master on this map. A few seconds into firing, we couldn't see the lava anymore because of how many snowballs were on the track. He not only broke open the outer layer when it finished the first loop, but all the insides popped only a couple seconds after. He took this out so fast, we had to wait for the second one to spawn in before we could move on. It was a dominating performance. This is great news that we can handle a Fortified Bad, as that's the tankiest Bloon that can spawn, and we don't have to face another one until around 200. The strongest Bloon until then will be a normal Bad, but it's only a matter of time until free play ramping makes him even tankier than this one. This really showed itself on round 183, where 3 bads marched through the map. The APM didn't break open the first 2 until they were at the bottom of the second loop, and the DDTs inside actually made it close to the end, which I was not expecting. But because the map was full of snowballs for so long, the final bad was actually easier to take out, which is not the case for most towers. The next several rounds looked pretty much the same. The map would be full of DDTs or other blimps, but our Apex Plasma Master would just fire away at a couple bads, popping everything else in the process. But as we know, the Bloons get faster and tankier with every round, and pretty soon, they were making it to the final loop, like on round 193, where the BFBs at the end got to the very bottom of the screen. And on round 197, we actually leaked. The round started off with some miscellaneous DDTs and other blimps, but pretty soon, a bad and a ton of fortified ZOMGs spawned. This took the attention of our Apex Plasma Master, making him fire towards the bottom of the screen, and the round ended with 2 more bads. Even with his bouncing projectiles, the direction he was shooting did way less damage to them than normal, letting them finish the second loop with barely any bandages. He still managed to break the bads open before leaking though, only letting Moabs get through. So we tried again, this time setting him to strong. This way, he'll focus the bads and hopefully everything else will break open from the bounces. And this worked way better than I thought it would. Not only did he focus the bads, but with him shooting near the entrance, everything broke open much earlier than last time. I mean, most of the ZMGs didn't make it out of the first loop. So on top of being able to focus the bads when they spawned, there was almost nothing else left on screen. We broke open both bads to end the round when they were right next to him, and the insides were a piece of cake to clean up. What's funny is the next round, we actually needed to switch him back to first, as keeping him on strong leaked the DDTs that start the round. But making this change beat the round just fine, even though it ended with a few bads. So it looks like we just have to account for what order the blimps spawn in. If it starts with a bunch of DDTs, we'll need him on first, and if there are bads that end the round, we might need to switch him to strong. But really, every round was just a micro game, figuring out what we had to aim him at. It didn't take too many tries to get through each round, and actually, we beat 199 on the first attempt. But then, the fortified bads of 200 came. I tried a few times, but we were not breaking these guys open. The first fortified bad got focused the entire time and leaked without breaking, and the second one was much healthier. We actually didn't have a chance. So the Apex Plasma Master got to round 200 before leaking, and I ran this again on logs just to make sure, but over there he leaked in around 172, so the Tackagon score is 200. Next up, we have the Glaive Dominus, a much more powerful and expensive Paragon than the APM. We made this guy in the 70s and put him in the center of logs. This way, he'll be able to do the most damage to bads as possible, which are our biggest threat in this video. I did this challenge a couple years back when we only had 8 Paragons, and many of them have changed since then. Some got worse, some better, and others got a new ability, like this guy, who now is overcharged that gives him a ton of extra attack speed, but it decreases with time. At degree 100 though, its cooldown is shorter than the duration, so it has a 100% uptime, making him much better than in the past, even on a per dollar basis. He got off to a crushing start, not letting anything by him. He even popped around 140 fortified bad at the first log, and it was fun to watch his 3 attacks work together. He has a knockback rang that keeps Blooms at bay, deals tons of damage, and explodes when it's done. Then his main attack launches green glaives incredibly fast, and they bounce from bloon to bloon, and he has his orbiting rangs that deal damage to anything close to the Glaive Dominus. For the most part, his green glaives were breaking open the bads, while the bounces and knockback ranks took care of the other blimps, but he didn't have the range to attack ceramics on the left track, so almost all of them got popped by his orbiting ranks as they exited the first log, meaning all of his attacks came into play just about every round. This smoked the rest of the hundreds, as the bads on round 199 didn't even make it halfway through the map, and the DDTs weren't really a factor, either because of the ricocheting glaives would take them out, or if they were in first, the knockback rang would stall them and make them easy targets. Now, we just have to pop the fortified bads. I knew we'd be fine, but we popped both of them earlier than I thought. The first broke open above the water and the second below it, giving us a pass and a half to take out the insides. That's plenty of time, but the jump in difficulty from 199 to 200 is so large that I didn't know what to expect. Luckily, it went off without a hitch. From here on out though, fortified bads spawn regularly, so we'll have to take them out plus the rest of a round, which if layered correctly can get tricky. And on round 205, it actually caught up to us as we had our first leak of the run. The DDTs inside a fortified bad got through. Luckily for us, it was an easy fix. All I did was use his ability a little more intentionally. You see, the start gives more attack speed than the end of it, so I made sure to re-up it when bads were entering his range instead of when they were exiting. And this little bit of extra DPS let us pop both fortified bads that end the round right next to him, and wait the whole final straightaway to take out the insides. At this point, DDTs inside are starting to get scary with how fast they are, and that showed itself just a few rounds later on 208, where the DDTs inside a fortified bad snuck through and leaked. The round was full of bads, with one fortified one in the middle, so I tried again with the Glaive Dominus on strong so it would get focused. Surprisingly, he was able to pop everything else just fine like this, and we broke open the fortified one a bit earlier, giving us the time to pop the DDTs inside. And the ZMGs were a piece of cake as the knockback rank can permastall them. Surprisingly though, the next 20 rounds went off without a hitch. We were able to leave him on strong almost the entire time, and I continued to use his ability intentionally, and somehow it just kept working. There were plenty of times that the Bloons made it to the final straightaway, but we were able to handle them all with very few scares. But then round 228 came, and it was a huge jump in difficulty. 3 fortified bads and 5 normal ones came this round. We were able to pop the first one's outer layer, but the insides made it through. They finally got too strong and too fast, and we still had 2 more fortified bads to pop before the exit, so this one was not happening. Still, round 228 is a great score, especially considering the last time I made this video, he only got to round 172, so that's a huge improvement. Moving on, we have the Ballistic Obliteration Missile Bunker, or BOMB for short. We also put this one in the center of log so it could shoot at most of the track, but then it dawned on me, this guy doesn't have camo detection. And while it would be fair to say that it loses at the first camo, that kind of goes against the point of this video. So I filled the map with shimmers and a submergence support, as I want every DDT to be decamoed instantly so we can really see how much damage this Paragon does. And because the Bombagon will do a few 100 million damage, I don't think the attacks of these shimmer wizards will be the difference between winning and losing. At the start of this, the bomb was super consistent. His recursive clusters cover about half of logs if shot near the center, and the Bloons were going slow enough that the first explosion would break blimps open and the recursive clusters would pop all the super ceramics that came pouring out, making the rounds go by super fast. and because the path crosses over itself so many times, a random recursive cluster would clean up any balloons that were further along the track. That brings us to round 140, which was a very interesting round. One attack from the Hbomb put a band-aid on the bad, meaning it was already down to 75% health. But then we used his ability and it cracked the outer layer in one go and did enough damage to take out the DDTs too. So we only had the ZOMGs inside to take care of, which were gone after only 2 more shots. I'm used to this guy being inconsistent because I normally make him between degrees 40 and 60. However, having him all the way at degree 100 makes him so much more reliable. I mean, on top of his main attack having more popping power, his abilities have much shorter cooldowns, so you can spam his active one, and his passive that prevents you from leaking comes back so fast that it can really bail us out. Because of this, I thought we were going to coast around 200. I was spamming his ability, and his explosions were so big I just expected to clear the waves. But then, around 176 happened. Finally, the balloons were fast enough that the ceramics could outrun his explosions if timed correctly, and his main attack was having trouble homing in on them. It makes sense given how fast they're zooming through the map, but that is a problem we have to solve now. We easily have the damage for the blimps, it's only the ceramics that are getting through. To get by this round, I used his ability a bit later, but it got me thinking. I want the bomb Paragon to always be shooting right next to it, and preferably blimps, so that 1, it doesn't miss, and 2, the clusters hit half the map. That way, we have a better chance of cleaning up any ceramics that are further along the track. But on the following round, I used his ability, and it circled around popping so many balloons before eventually exploding on a blimp. This ability is normally used to one-shot bads, but we have enough damage to take them out. So what if I stopped spamming it and only used it when the balloons were getting far? I started this new strat and we instantly went back to clearing the rounds first try. Every once in a while a balloon would get through, but that's when his passive comes into play. Like the end of round 179, where somehow ceramics made it by him over and over again when the map was empty. But the Hbomb passive prevents you from leaking. You don't lose a life and it deals a ton of damage to everything on screen. So it's kind of a get out of jail free card, but it does have a pretty long cooldown, even at degree 100. So we have to be careful not to rely on it. And because of this ability alone, I stopped the run on around 196 and installed a few mods. The main one being Time Machine, that lets us go back in time a couple rounds if I mess something up. So if we beat a round using his passive and then get hard stuck on the next one, I can always rewind and try again. A super nice mod for challenges like this. Here, I also changed the bomb to target the closest balloon. He was missing so often by 196 that we were routinely leaking. It was clear that we have the popping power, it was just a matter of if we could catch the balloons before they snuck through. So I put him to close to keep that recursive cluster as centered as possible, and then it was just a matter of when to use his ability and if the ceramics would get caught by the huge explosions. I mean, we have so much damage that the fortified bad on around 200 broke open after just 2 abilities and a few attacks, and we rinsed and repeated for the next bad. You can really see how strong the bomb is against the OMGs and smaller, because his knockback just keeps them in place until they're down to ceramics, and then it's iffy on if we can catch them. And here, I will admit, the shimmers came in clutch. We had a couple balloons racing for the exit that they took out. Now, with a bit of grinding, I know we could have beaten the round without them, so I didn't feel too bad, but they did make a difference. I'll give them that. But now, we have to face fortified bads going forward. Round 201 didn't have any, but it was a great showing of us saving our ability for when ceramics were sprinting for the exit. The DDTs inside the final 2 bads got very far, and once the ceramics were on the final straightaway, I used his ability to take them out. Then, it homed in on the ZOMGs. So, it's nice that it can prevent leaks, and we won't waste its absurd damage as it'll home in on blimps after taking out the ones closest to the exit. The 200s were a grind, but it was different from other Paragons in that it wasn't a specific balloon type, like fortified bads, that were causing us trouble. It was now how the balloons layered on top of each other, and if ceramics or DDTs could squeak by in between explosions. And if they did, it normally took a couple retries of changing targetings or using the ability at different times. This was also when his passive was getting used more and more often, though I was trying not to rely on it. Once we got to the 220s, things really slowed down. A few rounds took several tries, and some others we only got by because of his passive. But once again, the round that ended the run was 228. Rounds are randomized after 140, besides a few exceptions. But because we're running the same challenge back every time, this is the same round 228 that ended the Glaive Dominus. So you can tell it's a large jump in difficulty. Unlike the Dominus though, the Bomb & Gun's issue wasn't breaking open the bads. It's that we had to focus them while ceramics got through, and there wasn't a timing for his ability that could stop them all. Next, we have the Crucible of Steel and Flame, or the Tac Paragon. Just like the bomb, we filled the map with shimmers and a submersion support, as this is the only other Paragon that doesn't have camo detection. I knew from free play runs that this is the best spot for the Tackagon, though it didn't really make sense to me. He doesn't have the range to reach the left or right track, so I was actually debating moving him to the left, especially since the rounds were taking so long to complete. But in the 90s, I finally started using his abilities and it all made sense. His extra range has almost 100% uptime at degree 100, and it lets him attack most of the track when placed here. I mean, he has more range than the Apex Plasma Master does when this is active. And this guy has the opposite problem of our previous Paragon. It's hard to get more consistent than the Crucible shooting hundreds of tacks every second, each splitting into even more splinters. There's no way ceramics or even DDTs can get through this many projectiles. That being said, he doesn't have the most single target damage unless we use his meteor attack or if a blimp is right on top of him, which only happens for a small percentage of the track. So if bads are right next to him, he'll do tons of damage, but other than that, he'll just be whittling them down. So from the get-go, it was clear that bads would be our problem, making me excited for round 140. His meteor was on cooldown for the start, but the second we used it, the initial explosion almost broke the fortified bad open, and all the fireballs that returned to the center popped everything inside. It was actually a pretty cool pop to watch. For the next 60 rounds, it went exactly as you would expect. There aren't any rounds that are a huge jump in difficulty in this section, so the Tackagon did his thing. The king of consistency did solid damage throughout the track, and as the balloons got healthier and faster, they slowly made it further and further. With each round, they got closer to the exit, and we'll just fast forward some footage to show him taking the balloons down. While that plays, I want to say if you ever purchase something in the store, consider using creator code Hbomb. It actually helps the channel out a lot, but back to the video. It was clear that the balloons were going to leak soon, and we might have to start timing our meteor better. But then, round 200 came, and we were not beating this round. We were able to break open the first fortified bad, and it looks like we might break open the second one, but we could never clean up the blimps inside. Some fortified BFBs made it through every time. So around 200 is his score, tying the Apex Plasma Master on Sulphur Springs. Now, we have the final primary Paragon, the Herald of Everfrost. This guy is definitely one of the more support-based Paragons, as he has tons of slows and provides extra damage to everything else. But that doesn't mean he can't pop balloons on his own. And because he's an ice monkey, we actually put him in the dead center of the map in the pool of water. Putting him here lets him cover a ton of the map, and his slowing aura could hit plenty of the track. But what was interesting was sometimes he would attack balloons on the left track, and sometimes he wouldn't. I don't know what that was about, because it would change from round to round. Sometimes he would hit BFBs over there, and other times he would let ZOMGs go by. I don't know what was going on, but either way, he would always attack them as they came out of the first log, and his beam destroyed the balloons. It was super nice having an attack that does several instances of damage, as he could take them from Moabs down to nothing with one attack. So we didn't have to worry about waves of super ceramics getting by. The first round that got far was 138 with all the DDTs that spawned. It started off a bit slow, but they quickly marched through the track. What's nice about the Herald is that every few seconds he has a global slope that freezes and permafrosts everything below bads. So every DDT would get hit by this and let him catch up on the popping. So while they got over halfway through, we weren't really at risk of leaking. And that brings us to round 140, where we have to face the fortified bad. If there's one thing this guy doesn't have, it's single target damage. And this was one of the funny rounds where he didn't attack the leftmost track, which is wild considering how big the bad's hitbox is. But when it did get inside his range, we used his ability that freezes everything and let him fire away. I wasn't sure if we could break this guy open, but as he passed the pool of water the last time, we got through the outer layer. And surprisingly, the Herald popped the DDTs inside no problem. This did not give him much time to pop the normal bed afterward, but he had already hit it enough that it was actually a very easy cleanup, and we were on to the mid-hundreds. From here, the game plan was simple. We didn't have to do anything until he was attacking bads, where I used his ability to freeze the screen and give him a little more time to break them open. And the reason we could hold on to it until then is that we can only use it once per round, so we don't have to try to use it as often as possible. This worked very well, letting us get to round 159 pretty quickly, first trying almost every round. But here, there were just too many bads to break. 4 of them spawned, and they were led by a bunch of DDTs, so we couldn't even focus them right away. I tried microing him, but in the end, the best we ever did was having the insides of the second one get through. So round 159 is his score. Moving on, we have the military Paragons, starting with the Nautic Siege Core. This was one of the faster Paragons we had. On top of having preemptive strike missiles that fire every time a balloon spawns, it also has global range thanks to it being able to use the vision of our other monkeys. To let him see the entire track, I filled the map with radar scanner villages. This way, he can see camo balloons everywhere and they won't help get any pops. Between the preemptive strike missiles and his darts, nothing really made it on screen. I mean, the Bloons didn't turn the corner until round 140, where the fortified bad was the first one to make it around the bend, and even this guy broke open before the first log. So the Spactagon was haulin' to say the least. This guy is pretty well rounded. He has enough single target damage to break open bads and fortified ZOMGs before they become an issue, and his darts were fast enough to hit DDTs and ceramics reliably. So we kind of just went in order of popping Bloons first to last. The only downside was if there were a bunch of Bloons on screen, we couldn't go through them all at the same time, like the Crucible of Steel and Flame or Apex Plasma Master could. That weakness didn't really come into play until a lot more Bloons spawned, like in the 180s where we sometimes got a train of fortified ZOMGs and a couple bads. For example, round 186, he didn't get around to popping the bads until they were halfway through the map. Even with this though, we had plenty of time to clean up the insides, but it looked like this would be his downfall. That being said, we haven't used his ability yet. When activated, the Spactagon disables itself for 15 seconds, then shoots 3 massive nuclear missiles. They each produce explosions that deal tons of damage and leave behind pools of plutonium radiation that hurt any Bloon that passes through them. This normally has a 4-minute cooldown, but at degree 100, it's only 135 seconds. And round 193 is where we first had to use it. We leaked at the very end of the round, so I decided to use this ability the second time around. I started by letting the Spactagon pop all the fast Bloons, waiting until the Moabs and DDTs were dealt with before activating the ability. We just need to make sure that nothing will leak during the 15-second downtime. The 3 missiles were launched into the air and took out every single bad on screen. There were 6 of them on the right side of the map, and after the explosions, the only thing left were ZOMGs, which we made quick work of. Between the missiles and radiation, they melted, instantly moving us to the next round. The only thing is we now have to last the next 2 minutes with Final Strike on cooldown. Luckily, the next round set us up for success. The start was all BFBs and ZOMGs, which we can handle no problem with its main attack, and the tough Bloons didn't spawn until the end. Here, 3 bads swam through the track, but with nothing else to focus on, we had enough damage to take them out. The final one made it pretty close to the exit, but by the time we popped it, Final Strike was almost off cooldown, so it looks like we'll be able to use it every other round. I activated it again to end 198, and 199 was set up perfectly for us, letting us get by and only having 20 seconds left on the timer for round 200. It took a couple tries, but what got us through was activating the ability right when the second fortified bad spawned. This let the missiles damage both bads, breaking the first one open on the rightmost pass and do plenty of damage to the second one. Because of this, we were able to clean up the ZOMGs and still break the second bad open in the top right loop, and we were able to pop everything before they even reached the final straightaway. So we were able to pass round 200 even with this massive jump in difficulty. No fortified bads or crazy layering happened on 201, so we got by with just a bit of micro. But 202 was too much. The round started off with 3 bads, one of which was fortified, then mixed in a bunch of DDTs and ZOMGs, and ended with a 4th bad. I tried a bunch of different timings and got close a couple times, but I couldn't beat the round. So the Nautic Siege Corps barely beat out the Tackagon with a score of 202. Shifting gears, we have the most expensive Paragon in the game, the Goliath Doomship, and he was worth the price. I'm just going to start on round 140, where he completely popped the bad before the opening turn, and that was without any micro, wing monkey, or using his ability. Needless to say, nothing was really getting on screen for a while. The 190s are where the first Bloons started making it a turn or two in, but round 200 is where the fun starts. Here, we had Wing Monkey on and were making great progress when I activated the Doomship's Carpet Bomb ability. This calls in another ace to Carpet Bomb a part of the track, and it broke open the first bad like it was nothing, only leaving the ZOMGs left, so we gotta skip the DDTs. And that's when I found out that the ability only has a 33-second cooldown when it's degree 100, so it's not spammable, but we can use it pretty often. I mean, it was back up when we were breaking open the second bad. We popped this one on the right side of the water, and its insides made it about halfway through the track, so things were looking good, especially if we can maximize its ability. From here, I just left the Goliath Doomship on Wing Monkey and let him do his thing, unless a fortified bad spawned. If one of those was going through the track, I would carpet bomb it to do as much damage as possible. If I didn't use the ability, the DDTs would sometimes sneak through, so we actually started relying on its ability in the 210s. This worked very well, but every once in a while, he would just go rogue on Wing Monkey mode and fly off the screen to the point where DDTs would get through. The first time I really noticed this was on round 219. We were sitting pretty, popped a bad halfway through the track, and he just flew to the top right until the DDTs leaked. This didn't always happen, but it was mildly annoying, causing us to lose a few times in the 20s. But that brings us to round 228, the round that has ended our best 2 Paragons so far. I thought it was going to best us again, but I started messing around with where we target the carpet bombs. It was up to start the round, so I aimed at the front of the track and used it right away, causing the planes to hit the first 2 fortified bads. Then I moved it to the top right corner. The main attack popped the first bad, and when the bombs came off cooldown, we could use it to damage the final 2 fortified ones. If done correctly, this would do enough to the first few whales, letting us take them out and buy enough time to use the third and final carpet bomb at the end of the track. After plenty of tries, we were able to live long enough for these to land, which basically cleared the screen, letting us move on to round 229 and set a new record. This round was made for us. There was only 1 fortified bad in the entire round, so it should have been a piece of cake. But 4 times in a row, Wing Monkey let me down and let the DDTs inside of it get through when we had plenty of track to pop them. During this time, I was also messing with where to put his carpet bombs, making them slightly better each time. But after several attempts, I finally changed his flight pattern. What got us through the round was putting him on circle, and the DDTs had to go right under him when they were going around the last turn. The Bloons had finally gotten too fast for Wing Monkey to keep up, and his missiles didn't have time to home in on them. We made this even better on round 231 as DDTs kept getting through, and I realized that circle and centered were not the best solutions. See, the bads move slow enough that we do plenty of damage to them as is, and what we really need to do is help the Goliath Doomship pop the DDTs that come rushing out, and that only happens at the back of the track. Luckily for us, we can set him to figure infinite, where he flies over the final 2 straightaways basically the entire time, and has pretty good uptime on the up and down paths as well. This let us pop the DDTs much better, and we passed rounds 231 and 232 only a few tries later. Unfortunately for us though, this is where the run ends. Round 233 has 2 fortified bads that were spread out, making it difficult to damage them both with the ability. And while there were other bads mixed in there, they weren't really a factor. Even with moving his carpet bombs around, something always leaked. But we have a new record of round 233. Moving on, we have the Navarch of the Seas, the second military Paragon. Similar to the Doomship, we're going to start around 140 and refrained from using his ability to one-shot the bads. Instead, we let his cannons fire away, and he broke open the fortified one about halfway to the first log, and his planes popped the normal one before it even entered his range. This went on for a long time. Even in the 190s, bads were barely getting to the first log, and nothing else stood a chance. The fun thing to watch though was whenever his hooks were done recharging, several blimps would get pulled in and he'd push the balloons back to the entrance. He was so good that I didn't even use his big hook on round 200, and he was able to pop both fortified bads before they finished the vertical paths. But as we know, round 201 is where things start to get difficult. The RBE budget shoots up and multiple fortified bads can spawn every round. Because of this, I started using his giant grappling hook whenever I saw one to make it easier and speed up the rounds. What was nice though was DDTs didn't stand a chance. The Navarch has 6 turrets that aim and attack balloons independently, with each of them shooting 3 explosive cannonballs and 6 grapes with each shot. So when the DDTs got close and would get hit by everything, they evaporated. Not to mention the 3 fighter planes that are flying around the map dealing tons of damage too. This well-rounded damage let us cruise to round 233, the round that beat the Doomship. At this point, only fortified bads were making it halfway through the map, and just to see what would happen, I didn't even use its large hook. There were only 2 fortified bads this round, so we could have one-shot them both, but even without the ability, we managed to clear the round. Sure, the insides of the second one made it to the final pass, but it was nice knowing that we can take out a couple of them normally. Surprisingly though, there wasn't a round with more than 2 fortified bads for a while, so we could always take them out with a couple hooks. This ability can only be used twice per round, which is almost never a problem unless you're doing a challenge like this. Normally, the map isn't long enough to let you get it back up for a third use in time, but on round 244, it finally bit us in the butt. 4 fortified bads spawned, and we were never able to pop them all. But this still blew out the record by 11 rounds, and the Navarch was able to do 909 million damage this run. On to the magic Paragons, starting with the Magus Perfectus, one of the Paragons that's a little more hands-on than the others. He has a mana pool that you have to manage, and 2 abilities that drastically increases DPS for a short time. One merges the Phoenix with him to give the Magus an overpowered flamethrower until he runs out of mana, and the other spawns zombie ZOMGs that float backwards along the track. dealing tons of damage to any Bloons that touch them. As for his mana, the Magus has two modes, generation and consumption. When consuming mana, the Magus attacks with powerful arcane spikes that deal tons of damage, revives Bloons it pops, and has a Dark Phoenix that launches purple flames all over the map, all of which consume mana. When in generation mode, the Magus gets a powerful laser that deals less damage, has more range, disables the Phoenix, but generates mana with each hit. Luckily, I didn't have to worry about all of that until round 200, where I used Arcane Metamorphosis for the first time. Up until this point, I just let it run AFK style, but now that the blimps are getting tanky, I figured I'd step in. I waited until both bads were on screen, maxed out his mana by putting him in laser mode, and used Arcane Metamorphosis to give him the flamethrower. This shredded the first bad and almost popped the second one before wearing off, but it did enough damage to let us clean up in the back half of the map. Still though, I expected a bit more from him, especially since he's so strong in boss events. But from here on out, I was on top of his abilities. For the most part, I just tried to end the rounds with as much mana as possible so I could use a max duration flamethrower right away if needed. This was rarely the case though, and the mana was easy to keep topped off as we could always farm a ZOMG or BFB at the end of a round. The DDTs inside bads were never really an issue, as the laser had enough piercing damage to take them out in time, and if the flamethrower was active, they didn't stand a chance. Even when the Magus was on strong to pop bads, the flamethrower would collat them. Occasionally, I'd have to turn on the Phoenix for a little bit to prevent leaks, but for the most part, it was straightforward. We marched through the rounds, almost never leaking until 220. The problem was we had to end 219 with a flamethrower, and we couldn't pop everything with just the beam and Phoenix, even though there weren't any fortified bads this round. Not the best sign in the world, but after enough attempts, I caved and used Metamorphosis again once it came off cooldown. A bit extreme, but it got the job done, and we got it back up in time for round 221, which was much tougher, but between another ability and some targeting, we made it through. And from here on out, basically every round took several tries to beat, the worst of which being 223. We had to aggressively farm mana while trying not to leak the DDT rushes. Once I got that timing down though, we were able to beat the round only a few tries later. But the round that finally ended it was 228, same as the Paragon and Glaive Dominus. The 8 bads, 3 of which were fortified, were too much, even with a maxed out Metamorphosis and a Desperation Explosion, so it's tied for 3rd place. Next, we have the Ascended Shadow, one that I always think of as a supporty Paragon as it provides camo detection, stuns Bloons like crazy, applies a permanent 50% speed reduction to everything but bads, and makes everything spawn in with 25% less health, including bads. But it does quite a bit of damage too if you let it, and that was apparent from the get-go. He was popping the Bloons just fine, but they took quite a bit longer than some of the other Paragons. The half speed made the early hundreds crawl by, with the only saving grace being his global sticky bombs that would break blimps open. Eventually, we made our way to around 200, where both bads came in with a band-aid thanks to his passive, and Genji broke open the outer layer after just 4 sticky bombs, not letting either of them get to the second log. Pretty impressive. And he kept up this performance. Really, the only time Bloons would get far was when there were several bads or a fortified one hidden amongst the crowd, as he can only throw sticky bombs so often. But even with this, he was marching through the rounds, and there was basically nothing for me to micro. I just let him run, and before long, Genji was on round 228, the one that took down so many Paragons before him. The passive damage went a long way, letting him break open the first 2 fortified bads before the halfway point, and the insides didn't stand a chance thanks to his stunning flash bombs. Then, he was able to break open every normal bad with his seeking attacks while he focused the final fortified one, not letting a single Bloon get to the far left. Shortly after, he beat round 233, the one that took down the Doomship, and it went exactly the same. We just left Genji on strong so he'd focus the fortified bads, and the rest would get popped with his remaining Pierce. That only leaves the Navarch, who's done better than him so far, but round 244 was pretty smooth. Sure, the 4 fortified bads gave him a run for his money, but the Ascended Shadow was able to break almost everything before it was at risk of leaking, and only 1 of the 8 bads made it to the final pass. It was a bit scary, but the second the outer layer broke, I knew he'd stall the insides until they were gone, and I just let him run until round 252. I tried several times with different targetings, but we weren't getting through. There were simply too many bads and not enough time, but Genji did a whopping 1 billion damage over the course of this run and broke the record by 8 rounds. Next, we have the newest Paragon, the root of all nature, and for the first time, I will be leaving some towers on the map. For the most part, it'll be villages and farms because he deals double damage if we have over $5 million and his ability spends money. but I also threw in some dart monkeys and beast handlers to force his trees to spawn in good locations. You see, on top of growing vines all over the track, the Druidagon summons storm trees all around the map that launch vine-nados at the Bloons. They don't plant on top of other monkeys, so we can force them to spawn in the middle and end of the map, making him much better. The only thing is that these vine-nados make for some very long rounds, especially later on once fortified ZMGs can tank tons of them and just be stuck at the start of the map. Nevertheless, we pushed through, absolutely destroying the rounds until 200, where the fortified whales pushed deep into the map. We might have been able to pop them as is, but this was the perfect time to put the druid into its wrathful state. When toggled, he gains plus 35% extra range, reduces its shot spread by 80%, and gets extra damage the more Bloons are on screen. Similar to the Avatar of Wrath, but consumes $10,000 every second it's on and disables all income. This popped both bads after being on for just a few seconds, and we went right back to business as usual, with me just watching the rounds to toggle him on if a fortified whale headed our way. Otherwise, I'd leave him in his base elemental mode. This worked incredibly well. Even on round 233, the one that took down the Doomship, the Druidagon was breaking open the fortified layers before the halfway point, and his stalls were unmatched. No other blimp was even a factor. The only hard part was paying attention long enough to catch when I needed to toggle him on and off. My solution to this was putting the game in 25 times speed at the end of every round when there were only ZOMGs or smaller left. But we kept on moving through the rounds. 244 was the next checkpoint with its 8 bads, and we were able to break all but one of them open by the halfway point. Though, we did spend over $500,000 on this round alone. That only leaves one other Paragon that's done better than the round 252. I can see how this took out the Ascended Shadow, as there are 10 bads with small gaps between them. But the Druidagon made this round look easy. Since only a few were fortified, a majority of the screen was cleared out quickly, and even the final 2 whales only made it to the second to last log, so it wasn't even close. As you'd expect, every round got slightly tougher, and we were burning tons of money. We spent 200 rounds building up as much money as possible, and thank goodness we did, because we're spending close to $1 million per round to keep this run alive. Not even round 263 was free, as there were so many Moabs and DDTs on screen that we needed the Wrathful mode to take them out before they leaked, something I never thought would be the case, as nothing but bads have been a problem for us so far. But that brings us to round 264, where we could not pop the final fortified bad in time. The spacing, along with the extra health and speed, made it too much for the Druidagon, even with some different targetings. Still, he destroyed the record we just set with the Ninjagon and did a whopping 1.5 billion damage this run. Moving on, we have the second most expensive Paragon in the game, the Mega Massive Munitions Factory. The second I got it down, he filled the map with his passive spikes and started loading the back of the track with super mines. But there was nothing really to watch for a long time. The first cool round was 200. The first bad broke open from the Spactagon mines placed throughout the track, which made me think the second was going to get twice as far, as the mines are a one-time use. But then, Spactagon came back off cooldown, and when you activate this while there are still mines on the screen, it detonates them instead of spawning more mines, instantly cracking the bad down to ZOMGs, and moved us on to the next round. Surprisingly, a bunch of DDTs rushed all the way to the exit on 201, and this kind became normal. If we didn't have Spactagon mines down, blimps would make it super far into the track, even getting to the end on occasion. But with logs being so long, it would let the Spactagon fill up its mine pile and get its abilities back with more than enough time to prevent any leaks. But eventually, bads had enough health to routinely make it to the end of the track, like round 252, where 7 bads hit the spike pile next to the Paragon, a few of which were fortified. At this point, I figured we'd leak any minute. I couldn't see how large our pile was as it was hidden behind the Spactagon, but we kept going. Soon, we were on round 264, the one that beat the Druidagon. Those 8 bads marched through the screen unfazed for most of the trip, but then Spactagon came back off cooldown, and those mines that rained down from above popped everything but 2 fortified bads, and they were heavily damaged, easily taken out by the pile at the end. I had no idea when this would end, but then we leaked on 267, easily getting the Spactagon first place, but I thought we had a chance of beating it. Every attempt, I continued to use Controlled Burst at the start of the round for the extra attack speed, but I mixed up the timing of Spactagon. I waited until we popped every ZOMG, and then the mines somehow broke open all but one of the bads. I don't know how this did so much more damage than previous attempts, but I'll take it. And our Spactagon was able to defend the rest from here. The next few rounds were easier, letting us first try them and build back our wall. But all great things have to come to an end, and for the Spactagon, that was round 272. The round started with a couple waves of DDTs, but the real threat was the 8 bads layered on top of a stream of ZOMGs. Even with several attempts, we were never able to take everything out. I was happy with this new record, but then Mahalik Pops told me that the Spactagon is better on spa pits as you can activate Spike-a-Geddon more often. So we ran it again, getting to round 272 super easily. The reason this is the case is because Spike-a-Geddon only puts down new mines if all the previous ones have already exploded. If there's even one mine left on the track, the ability will just blow them up instead of placing more and puts it back on cooldown. This would be fine, but the Spactagon always puts a mine at the very back of the track, which is almost impossible to trigger on logs. But here, on spa pits, the exit and entrance are in the same spot, so the Bloons trigger it immediately. So I just had to make sure that all the other mines went off before using Spike-a-Geddon again. This was the easiest micro of my life. Use his first ability at the start of every round and scan the screen to see when I can launch mines again. The only other thing I did was occasionally move where the normal spikes were being placed, because I didn't want any Bloon hitting them unless they were going to leak, and the bads have such large hitboxes that occasionally they'd get damaged when passing by. But the rounds went on pretty flawlessly until the 290s. Spike-a-Geddon would do most of the work, even if tons of fortified bads were on screen, and really only the insides or DDTs would make it to the actual pile. But in the 290s, tons of blimps started making it to our Paragon, and it was only a matter of time until our safety net of spikes ran out. And for us, it was 293 that did us in. The 9 bads and tons of ZOMGs were too much. Even with a bunch of attempts and trying different Spike-a-Geddon timings, we couldn't handle them all. But this shatters our record, and the Spactagon did an incredible 3 billion damage. It's kind of crazy how fast this damage stacks up, as he only made it 29 more rounds than the Druidagon, but did twice as much damage. It's hard to follow that up, but next is the Master Builder, the final Paragon of the video. I made sure to get him down early to start his attack speed ramp up. This only takes 17 rounds to cap out at degree 100, but it's a habit of mine to rush him. Then I tech botted him to always be cycling his turrets, and I was excited to power glove himself. But I found out he actually can't do that. I've never been in this scenario where there isn't a better tower to overclock, so you can imagine my surprise and letdown when we couldn't use it. But I did find out that the turrets are so small that they can fit below the water but above the track in the dead center of the map. But like most other runs, nothing really happened until round 200. The fortified bads broke open about 50 and 75% of the way through the track, and the insides were a non-factor. The engineer's main attack can pin ZOMGs and below, making it an amazing cleanup Paragon, especially once the Bloons get fast. So really, only the braced whales were a problem, and they eventually got too far on round 221. The funny thing was a couple ceramics snuck through at the end of the round, which would normally be upsetting, but I found it funny as we have one last trick to up our DPS. It's finally time to aim our laser sentry. I kept my mouse on the fortified bads, and with this improvement, we were able to break them open on the second to last and final straightaways, and no ceramics snuck through this time. This micro bought us a few more rounds, but round 228 was too much once again. After a few attempts, it was clear we couldn't pop everything in time, as a healthy fortified bad always made it to the exit. So the Master Builder joins the Magus, Paragon, and Glaive Dominus for 6th place. But that was how far every Paragon could get on its own. If you want to see how far each hero can get in chimps, click this video right here.